Hello everyone, I'm Rosphere, and in this video I'm going to be talking about Classic WoW Season of Mastery, and specifically Classic WoW Season of Masteries that are going to be happening in the future, hopefully, assuming that Season of Mastery actually goes well. Now, with that being said, Classic WoW Season of Mastery class changes is specifically what I want to be talking about. So, what kind of class changes could they be bringing to the game in the future, and what should they be looking at from the perspective of game design? Now, I'm going to go through each class individually in separate videos. So I'm going to start off this video with the Paladin, and we're going to spend this video talking about the Paladin. The next video will be about another class that I have not chosen yet. Maybe you guys can add some comments and help me pick down below. But I'm going to try to be doing these at least once every week, maybe once every other week. But we will eventually get through all of the classes and all the class changes that I think should be coming to the game, and kind of go over how I would look at it from a game design perspective if I was a developer working at Blizzard. So, to start things off, we're going to go ahead and look at what is a Paladin, right? And that's a pretty nebulous question as far as like what is a Paladin. But what is a Paladin in World of Warcraft? What does it evoke when you think of Paladin? So it's a few things for me. I think first off, wow, that font is huge. Give me 1 second. That's better. So, first off, I think a Paladin is, and we'll do this. Change the color of the font. Come on. There we go. Okay. So, a Paladin is, first and foremost, a warrior of light, right? So, I think that Warrior of Light is something that really describes a Paladin. Maybe Knight in Shining Armor. They're very virtuous, right? If I can spell. There we go. So, Paladin's very virtuous. I think something else that really describes a Paladin is sacrifice. So, we have Warrior of Light, Knight in Shining Armor, virtuous, and sacrifice. So that's kind of what I feel a Paladin is. And when I say sacrifice, I kind of mean like self-sacrifice for the benefit of others. They're not exactly in it for themselves. At least that's the kind of idea that I get when I think of Paladin in World of Warcraft. That's the kind of feel that I feel like the devs were going for. That's kind of how it feels they were designed in Classic WoW. Even though I know that specific parts of the Paladin weren't really fully fleshed out until like a week before actual release of Classic, which is kind of unfortunate and is partly why they're in such a bad position, or in such a position in Classic WoW where they're just not very good. So, at least DPS wise. So let's look at their current mechanics. So mechanics, this is just going to be a very broad overview. Let's see. Their support / healer. Support healer. The healing is really strong. The support is kind of meh. And I know that a lot of people are like, oh, they're really good support because of the buffs that they bring, like Salvation and Kings and all this other stuff. And it's like, yeah, those buffs are really strong, but they're not like game breaking. They are in a way, I guess Salve kind of is, because the Horde are having, much more difficulties raiding because they don't have a Salve. So there's a whole nother like argument. But having 1 or 2 buffs that, make you like a super like, oh, I have to have a Paladin in my group isn't necessarily making you a good support. It just means that you bring something that everybody really needs, even though having you there is kind of pointless, right? Like you don't bring anything other than healing. You bring a good buff. That's basically it. And DPS is bad. Like, I don't think we really need to go over that one any more than just DPS is bad, right? Because it's bad. So let's get off of text there. Okay, so this is kind of my idea of what a Paladin is. So you have Warrior of Light, Knight in Shining Armor, Virtuous, and Sacrifice. And specifically, self-sacrifice for the benefit of others. Like I said earlier, the mechanics of a paladin are they're a support slash healer. Their healing is strong, the support is meh, and their DPS is bad. Now, when you kind of look at it from that perspective, it doesn't sound like they're actually in a bad spot. Their healing is strong, the support is meh, DPS is bad. It means that you want them in a group. It just means that people who want to play them as like DPS can't necessarily play them as that because they're just not going to be able to keep up unless they're a guild master or whatever, or a streamer, that kind of thing. Generally, that's, kind of what I get from, the Paladin. It feels like from the wording there that there's really not an issue with where the Paladin is currently. But having played Classic World of Warcraft for, many years now, this is, going on 3 years in Season of Mastery on retail servers, and I guess like 6 months on private servers. I never really got too much into those, but having the knowledge that I'd have of Classic World of Warcraft, I think we can look at this and say, how can we buff the class in a way that makes them more fun to play? Now, when I say buff, I don't mean buff their DPS. I don't mean make it so that they can tank, which necessarily wouldn't be a bad thing, right? Like you could just do those things, but that's the issue that they run into in retail, where a class is like behind in DPS, and they look at the class and it's like, okay, we got to bring their DPS up. They don't look at like, what is the core of this class? And how do we make it better? How do we enhance the flavor of this part here, the Warrior of Light, the Virtuous, the Sacrificial? Like, how do we enhance the flavor of what the Paladin is at the core? Instead, they look at, okay, the DPS is bad. We need to increase their DPS. Their support's not that great. Okay, maybe their support needs to be a little bit better. But usually they don't even look at support at all. It's like, is their healing good? Yes. Okay, they're good. Is their DPS good? Okay, they're good. That kind of thing. They don't look at how to enhance the flavors of the class. So instead of looking at it like, okay, let's bring the DPS up, let's make it so that they can tank, because we could just easily just say like, okay, Paladins, you have a taunt now. And it solves like all of the issues with tanking. If you give them a taunt, even if it's like a much longer cooldown than a warrior thing like that, like you could just do that. So let's just say Paladins get a taunt so they can tank, right? And it's kind of funny now that I'm looking at this, I'm seeing that I didn't put anything that made me think of a tank for a Paladin, which I know might upset some people, but that's just kind of where I was. That's my thought process. It doesn't mean Paladins can't tank, obviously, but I just think it's kind of funny that I didn't put anything that kind of made me think of tanks, because I don't think of a tank when I think of a Paladin. I think of support, DPS, and healing. So let's just say we give Paladins taunt to make everybody else happy. I'm sure there's other things they could use, but moving on. So let's look at healing. Healing is strong, so we don't really need to do anything with their healing, and the support is meh. So how do we fix the issue of the support being meh? Because placing a buff on somebody is cool, like Salvation, Kings, Might, all these other things. Like you want a Paladin for each buff. Like that's cool, but it's meh because buffing is boring. And as a Paladin, I don't play a Paladin currently, but I've played a Paladin. Playing a Paladin and having to buff every few minutes pisses me off, because the buff doesn't last very long, and that's all the interaction you have with the buff is somebody in Discord chiming in saying, I've only got 2 minutes left on Might. Oh, can I have Might instead of Kings? It's like the biggest pain in the ass. And then you end up with somebody who, like, you have the group buff, or the class buff, I should say. So you buff the class, and then somebody else in that class wants a different buff than what you buffed the class with because they're a different spec. So you have to give them the short 5-minute buff, and then you have to track that and the longer buff, and it just gets to be a real pain in the ass, and it's not fun, right? It's not fun for the Paladin. So the support is meh because of that, because the buffs are boring, not interesting, and they piss people off, right? That's all it is. Like, it's cool to have the buff on you, but that's why the support is meh. Now, the DPS is bad for obvious reasons, because it's literally auto attack. Like you right click, AFK, go get a beer, you're good, right? Like that's Ret Paladin, right? Ret Paladin is bad because DPS is just bad. They don't do any like real sustained damage, and it's for many reasons. Like, you can kind of cheese it and do some decent DPS here and there, but it's like, it's not consistent. It's not a good way to play Paladin, right? Like, that's why people get upset when they see a red Paladin in a PvP, because it's like, oh shit, I could have had a good healer in here. Or in PvE, it's like, because, oh, well, now they're just not going to do anything. So this is an issue because it's low DPS. Now, how do we fix this being an issue without increasing the DPS, right? So we want to increase or fix this without increasing the DPS. And I know that sounds weird, but we're going to do that by increasing the flavor of the class up here, right? So we want to increase what flavoring, or the flavoring. We want to increase the core of the class, right? We want to fix that for the DPS specifically, because, and in fixing the DPS, I think we can actually add to and fix some of the support abilities, because we don't want to take away the buffs, right? We could fix the buffs by just making them last an hour, right? Or persist through death. You know, stuff like that, that wouldn't really be game breaking. It's like, oh no, I don't have to buff every 10 minutes. Darn. I really like that when I get the buff the whole freaking raid every 10 minutes. It's like, no, okay. So we could just fix the buffing issue by increasing the duration to an hour and the soft buff to 30 minutes. Like, it's not going to break anything, right? It just fixes it. So you keep the buffs. That would make the support part stronger by increasing the buff duration. Now, DPS, again, something else we can do by making this, or with the DPS to make the support better, is maybe within the rotation we fix, or within, how do I say this? The first thing you would have to do is lower the mana cost of judgments and seals for paladins. And we would have to change them slightly so that, say, change some judgments around so that they're more group wide, or AoE wide, I should say, or raid wide. So say when the paladin is seal twisting, or not seal twisting, man, I'm trying to put these thoughts together on the fly to kind of give you guys my thought process of how I go over these things in my head when I'm doing anything game design. So I don't know offhand what all the seals are, because again, I'm kind of trying to do this on the fly. I don't know what all the judgments do on the fly. But let's think, what could we do with those? Because we need to reduce the mana cost so that they can do them more often. And if they can do them more often, they could do something like, the more proficient you are with rotating through your seals and judgments, the more, maybe you have a 30-yard AoE haste buff for melee, right? So everybody that's melee within 30 yards of the paladin, when they're doing their DPS rotation efficiently, gets a 30% or 30%, a haste buff within 30 yards of you. That haste buff could be whatever. I don't know how much of a buff you would want to give out. Maybe somewhere between 3 and 5% haste, right? Just off the top of my head, some people are like, "Oh, that's game breaking. You can't do that." It's like, that's not the point. I'm just spitballing. I'm throwing ideas out there for things that Blizzard could be doing and making changes to Classic WoW to increase the flavor of the Paladin without increasing the DPS. So this is, you reduce the mana cost of seals and judgments, but you do nothing to the damage of the Paladin. You leave it as it is. You don't touch it so that... sorry. You leave it as it is so that the Ret Paladin's damage doesn't necessarily go up much, if at all. And when they're doing their rotation, they're benefiting the rest of the raid. Now, maybe you could reduce the... how do I say this? Reduce the duration of the judgment on the boss, and you'd have to change the way some of the judgments work. Obviously, you'd have to like add certain things, like add completely new mechanics to what the judgments do, and in turn, these judgments would be like I said, a haste buff. The one I know, there's the one judgment that gives mana back when you do, when you hit the boss. Maybe you could extend that to spells as well. So, say when that mana judgment is up on the boss, you get 40% of the mana cost back from the spell that just hit that boss, right? So if you're a Frost Mage and you hit Ragnaros with a Frostbolt, while the mana judgment is up on the boss, you get 40% of the cost of that back, right? Instead of just having to auto attack to get your mana back, because that's kind of dumb. You're going to go up and poke Ragnaros with your staff to get your mana back. It's kind of dumb. So you could change it to work like that. You could even change it so that it gives an AoE like boon to everybody as far as like their mana back as well. So a Paladin is kind of like this big AoE buff machine. At least a Ret Paladin would be, right? So you definitely would want it. You'd want one in your raid. Obviously, these things couldn't stack. So then it would give people a reason to play Ret Paladin. Maybe instead of making them raid wide, you could make them party wide. So you'd want more, maybe 3 or 4 Ret Paladins in your raid, so that you could benefit. Say, you'd have one for the melee group, you'd have one for, or a couple for the healers, and one for the like big like pumpers as far as like caster DPS goes, right? You could manipulate these, the judgments and seals so that the Paladin radiates this AoE buff to their group within the raid, right? And that keeps a lot of the flavor of this self-sacrifice, because you're sacrificing your own DPS on the meters, for example. You're sacrificing yourself for the benefit of the raid, for the benefit of the group, right? So you'd want one in your party as far as like doing dungeons, 5-man stuff like that. You'd want multiple Ret Paladins in your raid so that you could have these buffs. And again, these are not like fully fleshed out. This is just kind of an idea. I have to sit down and actually like write out like, okay, I have to look at what the current seals are and what the current judgments are, and be like, okay, we could change this one to do this one to do that. And then not all of them would go through. Obviously, there need to be some testing that goes in to see if, how overpowered they are, how broken certain things would be, so on and so forth. But there's a lot of like, for example, issues with the fights lasting a little bit longer. I haven't done any raiding in Classic Season of Mastery yet, but there was a lot of concern, especially going into, say, AQ40 and Nax, that the bosses are going to last a lot longer. So we're going to end up in a situation where, ranged are just not going to have the mana to make it through the whole fight in time, which, is kind of shitty. So giving them something like I said earlier with that mana buff could actually solve that issue without actually buffing other classes. So you could fix a lot of the issues in current Season of Mastery by making a change like that. And in turn, more people get to play Ret Paladins and play that, have that class fantasy that they're looking for. Instead of like in classic World of Warcraft, where every guild just kind of had their own pet Ret Paladin. It's just like you had your Ret Paladin. And yeah, it's kind of funny. But yeah, I think that would solve a lot of the issues with that, that sort of thing. Yeah, so that's kind of the idea of what I would go for with the Paladin specifically, is to make those changes to kind of increase the flavor of the Ret Paladin there. So you have like I said, Warrior of Light, Knight in Shining Armor, Virtuous, Sacrifice, and making it so that your buffs are more like radiated out of the boss in a way that is more beneficial to the group during a fight, rather than just casting a buff here and there. Kind of gives people a reason to play Ret Paladin, and bring Ret Paladin into their group. And again, I know that these are not fully thought out ideas. Like I said, I would need to like sit down and actually write out like, okay, this one, and then go over it and bounce the ideas off of other developers if I was working at Blizzard, so on and so forth. But that's kind of the idea of, or kind of what I would be going for as far as fixing and making Ret Paladins better. You don't want to increase the DPS, because that ruins the flavor of the class. It's not what Blizzard should be doing as far as like buffing classes are. They should be looking at buffing the flavor, not the DPS, right? And like I said earlier, I didn't put tanking here, but to talk about tanking a little bit, Paladins are pretty well set to tank as it is. They just don't have a taunt, which makes it, really difficult for them to be a main tank. So you could literally solve that issue by giving them taunt. Like it's just there's no real other solution to that. Just give paladins taunt, problem solved. Yeah, I think that that solves the whole problem without harming the flavor at all, because it's not like a DPS buff or anything like that. It doesn't change how they currently function, other than the fact that they have a taunt. You could even just give them the TBC taunt if you wanted to keep that as like you keep it as paladin-y as possible. I don't really like the TBC paladin taunt all that much, even though it kind of works the same. It just, you taunt, you target the player to cast the taunt. It's like a target of target taunt. It's kind of dumb. Anyways, just give them taunt, and it solves all the problems with tanking it, for the most part. Not all of them, but it will allow them to tank as well. So this kind of fixes the majority of the issues with Paladin. There's other spells that you could add that add more flavor to the Paladin as well. Just say they have... oh man, I can't remember the name of it. The DI, Divine Intervention. They have Divine Intervention. There's some things you could do with that. Instead of you could add like a separate Divine Intervention where instead of how do I put this? Trying to think. Instead of saving one person and making them an immune and bubbling them, unable to move for the next, however, I think it's 5 minutes or whatever, until they click it off. Instead of doing that, you could keep that in there. So you have the regular Divine Intervention, and then you have like another version of Divine Intervention where it drops this consecration on the ground. You sacrifice yourself, and everybody that stood within that consecration gets fully healed. Fully healed every 3 seconds, and damage is reduced by 80% for 10-15 seconds. Something like that, right? Like you could easily just add some stuff like that to add more flavor as far as like, and that could be super useful, right? So let's say you have a boss, let's just say Ragnaros again. Let's say you have Ragnaros down to 3 or 4%, and you're wiping. There's 6 or 7 people up. You're gonna wipe. You're not gonna make it. So the Paladin casts Divine Intervention. The new Divine Intervention, cast that. And cast this big consecration, like AoE area on the ground. Everybody within it basically is not going to die because they're going to be fully healed every 3 seconds, and their damage is reduced by 80%. And it gives you another 15 seconds to beat on the boss, and you just barely manage to kill the boss, and everybody screams, that kind of thing. Yay! More utility stuff like that with the Paladin. In raid encounters, stuff like that could be really, really cool and interesting. Niche mechanics. It's something that you would use, I don't know, once or twice at most. Like, you're not going to have this situation happen very often, but when it does happen, it feels so good, right? Like, it's meant to give you this feeling of, I just saved everybody. I did that. I'm a fucking badass. We couldn't have killed this without me. Literally, like, could not have killed it without that person there. So things like that for the Paladin increase the flavor of the Paladin. As I was saying before, you want to increase you want to buff the flavor, not the mechanics. That's not how you play. Like, that's not the way to look at buffing people or buffing classes within MMOs or RPGs in general, because it kind of homogenizes everybody and puts them in this place where it's like, well, warriors do this much DPS, so paladins need to be doing at least that much or a little bit more. Right? Like, it's just, like, you can do that, but it takes away so much from the actual game as far as, like, how much fun it is. Because it ruins the flavor of the class in this, at the same time. So it's like, oh, now I'm just playing another warrior with heals. Right? Like, it's not different enough because they're not buffing the flavor of the class. So, yeah, with that being said, that's my game design discussion on the Paladin for Classic Season of Mastery. In the future, maybe Blizzard will see something like this, and maybe it'll give them an idea. I don't know. But, yeah, with that being said, I will be making these videos at least once a week. I hope once a week, maybe once every other week, but these will be coming out fairly frequently. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I will see you in the next one.